Hello, Pacific Northwest history. Today, I'm going to be talking about settlers in the PNW, but we're going to start with two groups specifically before moving on to kind of the Oregon Trail and that wave of mass migration that happened. So, today we're actually going to start by talking about fur traders. They were really the first group of people to come and settle in the Pacific Northwest that weren't originally here. So the first group of people of European descent who came here were actually the fur traders. Fur trading was become more popular globally, and hats made from beaver pelts were the most valuable. The western United States has a huge amount of fur-bearing animals like beavers, otters, and foxes, and making hats from these animals was extremely profitable. So a lot of people travel thousands of miles from Europe or from the eastern United States just to participate in trapping these fur-producing animals because they knew they could make a lot of money. You can see all sorts of the fancy hats that were made back then from these pelts. So yeah, fur trading, one of the most important historical events to happen in the PNW, believe it or not. Those beavers were very valuable. Speaking of which, some of the biggest fur trading forts that existed, a fort, would just be kind of an area with some houses and defended, mostly by a fence or something like that. Places like Fort Vancouver, Fort Spokane, Fort Boise, Fort Walla Walla. Notice something. All of these settlements for fur traders would one day grow to become large, famous cities in the Pacific Northwest. So a lot of the bigger cities that you might have visited or have family in, they were started because of fur trading. So fur trading, very, very important. It was the first thing that really brought people here from the eastern United States and Europe. But there was also another important event happening during this time, kind of the era of the Christian missionaries, which would be from 1834 to 1847. The very first permanent European settlers, not just coming to, trade their fur pelts and go back, but the permanent European settlers of the PNW were missionaries. Many missionaries focus on the Nez Perce, who were the largest Indian tribe at this time. So this era of history is only 13 years long before we really have the mass migration of people on the Oregon Trail, but it's still quite important. Here were some of the Protestant missionary objectives. The first thing, obviously, was to Christianize the local Indian tribes and make them into Christians. Number two is probably the most controversial thing, still probably to this day, and something that happened with a lot of Indian tribes. They tried to civilize, I put in quotes there, because let me finish. Civilize the Indians to bring them more in line with the social and economic ways of the incoming settlers. So basically, trying to change their culture, change their ideas to be more in line with what was going on in America and Europe, kind of the Western ideas of how to think and with their social and economic ways. So this was something that was very controversial and still is to this day. The idea of kind of forcibly trying to change the culture of an independent tribe. Number three was to strengthen the claim to the Oregon Territory for the United States. It was none of the states that we have in the Pacific Northwest were states yet. They were just territories. And the more people that you could send to that territory, the more strongly you could say that it was your state. They also wanted to educate the settler and Indian children in the region. And, some of that would be, kind of re-educating them, one of the tactics at the time was to kind of take Indian children away from their tribes and have them in a boarding school and then teach them Christianity and other Western kind of education narratives. And then hopefully you would try to, kind of take their culture away. So this is something that is still that a lot of governments have had to apologize for because we think, well, back then it was something where it's like, oh, of course you would do it because our culture is better and all that. That was just kind of an accepted way of thinking. But now we kind of can see that doing that and forcibly taking away their culture is something that we no longer think is acceptable. So that's just one of the ways that history has changed and cultural attitudes have changed too. And then number five, they wanted to spread their version of Christianity before the Catholic missionaries could. We'll talk about the Catholic missionaries at the very end here. Christian missionaries. So these are specifically the Protestant missionaries that happened at this time. So the first one that we're going to talk about is Lee's mission. It was the very first successful mission in the PNW. It's near present-day Salem, Oregon. Then we had the Lapwai mission, which is the picture I have there. It was founded by Henry and Eliza Spalding, and they worked with the Nez Perce Indians, and they were friends with the Whitmans, who are going to be the next one I will talk about. And they founded what is known as, let's say it slowly, because this is something I still have a problem saying, Wai-e-Latpu Mission. I'm sure those of you who have grown up in this area know how to say it much better than I do, because I did not grow up here. So, Wai-e-Latpu Mission. I'll get that one day. I'll be able to say it without having to look at the pronunciation guide, but we're not quite there yet. It was founded by the Whitmans in 1836, and it was an important stop on the Oregon Trail, and it welcomed many settlers. But it's most famous for what ended up happening on November 29th, 1847. So 11 years after its founding was what was known as the Whitman Massacre. Marcus Whitman, who was the founder of this mission, he was mistaken for a shaman by the local Cayuse Indian tribe. They believed that killing him would end the plague that had affected their tribe. And of course, the mission was a place where you had lots of different people coming through all the time, all these settlers going on the Oregon Trail, and they thought that if they could destroy the mission, that they could probably stop the influx of people coming in as well. So they also, they believed that killing him would end this plague. And so the Whitmans and 13 other residents of the mission were killed by the Cayuse tribe. And this was a huge event in Pacific Northwest history because it showed it will lead to a lot of the wars between the United States and Indian tribes later. So it's important to remember that this happened in 1847. The last thing we're going to be talking about today is kind of the Catholic success. The Protestants had some limited success in converting a lot of the Indian tribes, but the Catholics actually had more success. Why is that? Well, here are some reasons why. They did not emphasize changing the Indians' behavior and way of life as much as the Protestants did. The Protestants really wanted to convert and change the entire Indian culture. The Catholics were not so much about changing their behavior and culture. The Catholic ladder of authority was effective. You have, your priest, your bishop, archbishop. This kind of ladder of authority made it so it was, the whole church had a clear organization. Unlike a lot of the Protestant missionaries who came and they were kind of on their own. The Catholics had a whole, had the backing of the entire church behind them and a clear hierarchy of authority. Their mission sites were widespread between the coast and the plateau, and finally they traveled with the nomadic tribes instead of forcing them to live at a mission. So a lot of times they were just more successful at integrating themselves into the Indians' way of life as opposed to trying to change them. That's really what led to their success. Join me next time, and we're going to be talking specifically about the Oregon Trail. That's what we're going to be talking about next time. We're going to be talking about all the twists and turns and all the famous landmarks along the way that led people to Oregon and Washington and California from the Midwest and from the East Coast of the United States. We're going to talk about that important part of PNW history next time. I hope to see you then.